At 6:48 a.m. on January 4, 1943, a Petlyakov PE-2 dive bomber disappeared into a snowstorm 60 kilometers west of Saratov. The aircraft was leading two others to their first operational airfield near Stalingrad. Visibility was near zero. The pilot, Major Marina Raskova, 30 years old, the most famous female aviator in the Soviet Union, attempted a forced landing on the west bank of the Volga River. The aircraft struck the riverbank at speed. The entire crew perished. Marina Raskova died without knowing that the regiments she had created 15 months earlier were, at that exact moment, flying nightly missions over the Eastern Front. She died without knowing that the Night Witches would fly 23,843 combat sorties before the war ended. She died without knowing that 24 of her women would receive the Hero of the Soviet Union, the nation's highest honor. She died not knowing whether any of it had worked. She had asked for one thing: the chance to prove that women could fight. She got 15 months and a snowstorm. What she left behind changed the course of Soviet military history and the lives of roughly 2,000 young women who flew, maintained, armed, and navigated aircraft in combat because Marina Raskova had refused to accept no from everyone up to and including Joseph Stalin. This is the story of Marina Raskova, the woman who invented the Night Witches, then died before she could see what they became. Marina Mikhailovna Raskova was born on March 28, 1912 in Moscow. Her father, Mikhail Malinin, was an opera singer and vocal instructor. Her mother, Anna Lyubatovich, was a teacher. The family was cultured, educated, and thoroughly musical. An aunt was a celebrated Russian singer. The apartment was full of rehearsals, performances, and the serious study of voice. Young Marina was expected to follow her father into opera. She had the talent. She had the desire. She studied voice and drama through her early teens, and by all accounts, she was good. Then, when Marina was 7, her father was struck by a motorcycle and died from his injuries. The family lost its primary income. Marina lost her first identity, the future opera singer, the girl her father had been training. She continued her studies for a few years, but a middle ear infection in her early teens damaged her hearing enough to end her singing career definitively. One infection, one accident, and the life she'd been building dissolved. She was 14 years old and had to become someone else entirely. She pivoted, as people who've lost their first path often do, toward the practical. She studied chemistry and engineering through secondary school. After graduation in 1929, she took a job at a dye factory as a chemist to help support her family. At the factory, she met Sergei Raskov, an engineer. They married in April 1929. She took his name and had a daughter, Tatiana, in 1930. By any external measure, this was a settled life. Factory job, husband, child, Moscow apartment. The future opera singer had become a young Soviet wife and mother. And then aviation found her. In 1931, Raskova took a job as a draftswoman in the Aerodynamic Navigation Laboratory of the Air Force Academy in Moscow. She'd applied for work that matched her engineering background. What she found instead was an entirely different world. The laboratory was staffed by pilots, navigators, and aviation engineers, people who spent their working lives thinking about flight. Raskova had never been particularly interested in aviation before. Within months of working at the laboratory, she was obsessed. She enrolled in navigation courses at the academy. She proved to be extraordinary, precise, fast, spatially gifted. In 1933, at age 21, she became the first woman to earn the diploma of professional air navigator in the Soviet Union. The following year, she became the first woman to teach at the Zhukovsky Air Academy. What the aviation laboratory gave Raskova was not just a career, but an identity that fit her better than anything else had. She was methodical, where opera required inspiration. She was technically rigorous, where singing required surrender to emotion. Navigation, the precise calculation of position, course, fuel, time, engaged exactly the kind of mind she had. By the mid-1930s, she was setting long-distance flight records as a navigator, working with the most accomplished Soviet pilots on showcase flights designed to demonstrate Soviet aviation capability to the world. The flight that made her famous happened on September 25, 1938. Raskova flew as navigator aboard the AN-37 aircraft Rodina with pilot Valentina Grizodubova and co-pilot Polina Osipenko. Their mission: fly non-stop from Moscow to Komsomolsk-on-Amur in the Soviet Far East, covering approximately 6,000 kilometers, a world record for non-stop distance by women. They made it. But when the aircraft ran low on fuel near the destination, Raskova, to reduce the aircraft's weight for landing, was ordered to bail out. She parachuted into taiga forest in the Soviet Far East and was alone for 10 days before being rescued. Grizodubova and Osipenko landed the aircraft and waited by the wreck. All three survived. All three received the Hero of the Soviet Union, the first women ever to receive it. That decoration, and the flight that earned it, transformed Raskova from an accomplished aviator into a Soviet celebrity. Her face appeared on posters and in newspapers. Children wrote her letters asking how to become pilots. She gave public lectures. She appeared at official functions. She became one of the few women in the Soviet Union whom ordinary citizens recognized on sight. This celebrity would prove 2 years later to be the most important tool she had. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, Raskova was 29 years old and working as an instructor and records aviator. The invasion changed everything instantly. Within days, she began receiving letters, hundreds of them, then thousands, from women across the Soviet Union asking how to volunteer for combat aviation. Women who had flight licenses from civilian flying clubs. Women who had trained as navigators or mechanics. Women who had lost brothers or fathers or homes in the first days of German advance and needed to do something. Raskova collected the letters. She understood what they represented: an untapped reserve of trained aviation personnel in a country desperately short of pilots. Can a famous aviator with no political power, approaching a totalitarian dictator personally, change Soviet military doctrine and create the first female combat aviation units in history? Can one woman's refusal to take no for an answer build 3 regiments that would fly 30,000 sorties? Please like this video to find out. Subscribe for more Night Witches stories, and let's continue to October 1941. The Soviet military's position on women in combat was technically unwritten, but practically absolute. Women served in support roles: nurses, radio operators, factory workers, transport drivers, not pilots, not gunners, not navigators on combat aircraft. When women presented themselves at military enlistment offices volunteering for flight duty, they were processed politely, thanked for their patriotism, and redirected toward nursing courses. When they pushed back, their applications were delayed, placed in queues that led nowhere. The system wasn't designed to reject women explicitly. It was designed to exhaust them into accepting something else. Raskova bypassed the system entirely. She didn't submit applications. She didn't go through channels. She went directly to Stalin. She had met Stalin at state functions. She had his personal attention in the way that Soviet celebrities of her stature did. Not friendship, but recognition. She requested and received a meeting at the Kremlin in early October 1941. At that meeting, she presented the letters, thousands of them, from women across the country asking to fight. She made the case. The Soviet Union was losing aircraft and pilots faster than it could replace them. Thousands of trained women were available. Refusing to use them was a luxury the USSR could not afford. On October 8, 1941, Stalin issued the order: create 3 all-female aviation regiments. The 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment, flying Yak-1 fighters. The 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment, flying PE-2 dive bombers. The 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, flying PO-2 biplanes. All personnel, pilots, navigators, mechanics, armorers, ground crew, would be women. Raskova was promoted to major and placed in command of the training program, with personal command of the 587th. She had 3 months to build 3 combat-ready regiments from scratch. Raskova moved immediately. Recruitment was announced through military channels and spread by word of mouth among flying clubs and aviation schools. More than 2,000 women applied for approximately 400 positions in each regiment, a total of around 1,200 positions. Raskova conducted interviews personally for as many candidates as possible, prioritizing those with existing aviation experience, pilot's licenses, navigator certificates, mechanic qualifications. Most recruits were between 17 and 26. Many were university students, mathematics, engineering, sciences. Several held advanced degrees. They were, as a group, among the most educated young women in the Soviet Union. They were sent to Engels Military Aviation School near Saratov in November 1941. Training began immediately. The standard Soviet military aviation training program ran 18 months. Raskova's recruits had 4 months, from November 1941 to February 1942. The curriculum was compressed but complete. Aerodynamics, navigation, meteorology, aircraft mechanics, armament, bombing procedures, and flight training. They flew in all weather and at night from the beginning, because night operations were exactly what the 588th would require. They slept in barracks in near-freezing temperatures. They wore men's uniforms because women's military uniforms didn't exist. Oversized jackets, boots stuffed with newspaper. They studied by the hour they weren't flying. The washout rate was significant, but those who completed training were genuinely prepared. The sorting happened at graduation. The most skilled pilots and navigators went to the 586th Fighter Regiment, the most demanding and prestigious assignment. The next tier went to the 587th Bomber Regiment with PE-2 dive bombers, which Raskova commanded personally. The remaining pilots were assigned to the 588th Night Bomber Regiment with PO-2 biplanes. Many women assigned to the 588th felt the assignment was a demotion. Crop dusters instead of real aircraft, night harassment instead of real bombing. Raskova spoke to them directly. She told them the 588th's mission was as critical as either of the other regiments. She told them the PO-2's limitations were also its advantages. Invisible to radar, maneuverable in ways that modern aircraft weren't, capable of surgical accuracy that heavy bombers couldn't achieve. She told them to trust their aircraft and each other. By May 1942, all 3 regiments had deployed to the front. The 586th began combat operations in April 1942. The 587th and 588th followed in May and June. Raskova was at the front with the 587th, flying combat missions in the PE-2 dive bomber, a genuinely demanding aircraft, far more complex and dangerous than the PO-2. The PE-2 required 3 crew members, high-speed approaches, and precise bombing techniques. Raskova had trained on it specifically. She flew missions. She led formations. She was not a commander who stayed at headquarters. She flew. What she didn't live to see was the scale of what the 588th would become. By the time Raskova died on January 4, 1943, the Night Witches had been operational for 7 months. They'd flown thousands of sorties. They'd developed the engine-cut glide technique, the searchlight suppression tactic, the ultra-low altitude approach. They'd lost some crews and kept flying. The regiment was effective, but it had not yet achieved the legendary status it would earn through 2 more years of operations. Raskova died at the beginning of the Night Witch's story, not at its culmination. She never saw the 23,000 total sorties. She never saw the 24 heroes of the Soviet Union. She never saw the Iron Cross bounty the Germans placed on her regiment's pilots. She never saw the word Nachthexen become synonymous with terror on the Eastern Front. She built the machine, then left before it ran. The crash on January 4, 1943, happened in conditions that made it almost certain to be fatal. Raskova was leading two PE-2 aircraft from a rear base to an operational airfield near Stalingrad. The weather briefing before departure indicated deteriorating conditions ahead: cloud cover, reduced visibility, potential snow. Standard procedure would have suggested delaying the flight. Raskova departed anyway. She was needed at Stalingrad. The 587th needed its commander at the front. The battle for Stalingrad was reaching its climax. Soviet forces had encircled the German Sixth Army in November, and the encirclement was being contested. Delays were costly. She flew 60 kilometers west of Saratov. The weather closed completely. Zero visibility. Raskova attempted to descend below the clouds to navigate visually. Standard procedure when instrument navigation failed. The Volga River's west bank rose faster than expected. The PE-2 struck the bank while still traveling at approach speed. The impact was not survivable. Raskova and her two crew members died instantly. She was 30 years old. Stalin ordered a state funeral. It was the first state funeral of the entire war, for any Soviet military figure of any rank. Raskova's body lay in state in Moscow's Hall of Columns, where tens of thousands of Soviet citizens came to pay respects. Her ashes were interred in the Kremlin Wall necropolis on Red Square, the highest burial honor the Soviet state could bestow, reserved for its most important figures. She was placed beside the ashes of her fellow record-setting pilot, Polina Osipenko, who had died in an aircraft accident in 1939. Two women who had pioneered Soviet aviation, buried together in the wall of the Kremlin. The Night Witches and the 588th Night Bomber Regiment received the news of Raskova's death in a field briefing on January 6, 1943. Yevdokia Bershanskaya, the regiment's commander, gathered all available personnel. She read the official notification. She said, "Marina created us. We fly in her name." That night, the regiment flew its scheduled missions. Every crew, no exceptions. The morning was real. Several pilots who'd known Raskova personally described being unable to stop crying during pre-flight checks. But the missions flew. Raskova had trained them to do exactly that, to fly when it was hardest to fly. They did. In the months and years after Raskova's death, the Night Witches became precisely what she had promised Stalin they would be. The regiment received the Guards designation in February 1943, 1 month after her death. They received the honorific title Taman in October 1943 for their role in liberating the Taman Peninsula. They flew through Crimea, Belarus, Poland. They developed tactics that reduced casualties while maintaining effectiveness. They built a culture of absolute mutual trust and professional precision that became the regiment's defining characteristic. By May 1945, the 588th had flown 23,843 combat sorties, dropped 3,000 tons of bombs, and produced 24 heroes of the Soviet Union. The 587th Bomber Aviation Regiment, Raskova's own regiment, the one she commanded until her death, was renamed in her honor, the 125th MM Raskova Borisov Guards Dive Bomber Regiment. It flew 1,134 missions, dropping 980 tons of bombs. It produced 5 heroes of the Soviet Union. In 1943, the American Liberty ship Mystic was renamed Marina Raskova in her honor. She became the name on a ship that crossed the Atlantic, delivering supplies to the Soviet Union, still moving, still working, still crossing dangerous water long after its namesake had stopped. Raskova's daughter, Tatiana, was 12 years old when her mother died. She was being cared for in Moscow by relatives while her mother flew. She heard about the crash the same way everyone else did. Official notification, then the state funeral coverage in Soviet newspapers and on radio. She was 12, and her mother was a national monument. She attended the state funeral. She stood in the Hall of Columns and watched tens of thousands of strangers pay respects to a woman she was still learning to understand. Tatiana survived the war, grew up in Moscow, and lived a private life. Her mother's fame became a complicated inheritance, the weight of being the daughter of someone the country had turned into a symbol. What Raskova had done, in the 15 months between Stalin's order and her death in the snowstorm, was not merely organizational. She had done something harder and more lasting. She had convinced a generation of young women that their capabilities mattered, that their desire to fight was legitimate, that the state's initial refusal to deploy them was wrong and correctable. Every woman who flew a combat mission in any of the 3 regiments did so because Marina Raskova had refused to accept the assumption that gender determined fitness for war. That refusal predated the regiments. It predated the letters she brought to Stalin. It was present when she became the first female navigator in the Soviet Air Force in 1933, when she became the first woman to teach at the Zhukovsky Air Academy in 1934, when she bailed out into Siberian taiga and walked alone for 10 days, and then received the Hero of the Soviet Union and used the celebrity it gave her to do something that mattered more than any record she'd ever set. She didn't get to see the end. The Night Witches flew until May 4, 1945, 3 days before Germany surrendered. They flew 23,843 sorties. They produced 24 heroes of the Soviet Union. They became, in the decades after the war, the most famous female military unit in history. Nadezhda Popova flew 852 missions and spent 68 years making sure no one forgot them. Rufina Gasheva flew 848 missions and attacked the same convoy 5 times in one night. Irina Sibrova flew 1,008 missions, every one of them in an aircraft that existed because Marina Raskova had walked into Stalin's office with a bundle of letters from women who wanted to fight. Raskova never saw any of it. She saw 7 months of operations, some early missions, some early losses. She saw the beginning. She built the beginning so well that what followed needed no further instruction from her. That's the story of Marina Raskova, the woman who wanted to be an opera singer, became the Soviet Union's first female navigator by accident, set a world record that nearly killed her, used the celebrity it gave her to change Soviet military doctrine, trained 3 regiments of women in 4 months, and died in a snowstorm at 30 years old, 15 months before the war ended and 28 months before her Night Witches flew their final mission. She didn't see what they became, but everything they became because of her. If this story moved you, if it reminds you that the people who start things rarely see them finished, and that starting anyway is the whole point, hit that like button. Subscribe for more Night Witches stories. Every video in this series exists because Marina Raskova convinced Stalin to let her build something. Turn on notifications. Leave a comment telling us what part of this story you'll remember. We read every one. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one. One final detail that history records almost as a footnote, but which says everything. The 587th Bomber Regiment, Raskova's own unit, the one she was leading to Stalingrad when she died, flew its first operational mission on January 28, 1943. 24 days after her death. The women she had recruited, trained, and commanded flew that mission without her. They flew it in PE-2 aircraft she had arranged for them to receive. They flew it over territory she had studied on maps at angles. They flew it in formation techniques she had drilled into them through 4 months of compressed training. They flew the mission she had been flying to reach when she died. Every bomb they dropped was a kind of answer to the snowstorm that had taken her. She had asked for the chance to prove that women could fight. They proved it. They kept proving it for 2 more years. 1,134 missions, 980 tons of bombs, 5 heroes of the Soviet Union. Marina Raskova asked for a chance. They gave her 30,000 sorties.